Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of Art Like Everything Else, the podcast. I'm your host, Simone, and this week we're going to be talking about art and identity. Now, so many things go into one person's identity. So the dictionary actually defines it, identity as the distinguishing character of a personality of an individual. And then I read an article on Psychology Today. They kind of go so far as to detail identity as encompassing the values people hold, the containment of multiple roles, and of each of those roles holding meaning and expectations that are internalized into one's identity. Now, this is the lens that we're kind of going to be looking at today's topic. So identity can be literally be so much, and with the works of art that I'll be discussing today, we'll be discussing and like just the exploration of one's identity and the ways identities can come to be. Now, before I move on, like, comment, subscribe, and let me know what your favorite work of art that talks about identity, or maybe it does. Maybe the art don't talk about identity. Share with me a piece of art that means a lot to you at this moment, and let me know why. I'd love to hear about it. And with that being said, let's get started. The first work of art we will actually be revisiting an artist whose work we kind of explored previously on this channel already and on this podcast. So none other than Moses Sumney. Now, not much has changed. Moses Sumney is still a singer, a songwriter, an actor, director, and an all-around creative. And the project of his that we will be discussing today is actually his second studio album. That album is called Gray, and so Gray was actually a double album that was released in two parts. The first part was released in February of 2020, and the second part was released in May of 2020. And so here are some things that Moses had to say about this album. The great in between, using the album title and the word great. Gray is about grayness or interstitial space or marginal identity, or that which is neither black nor white, or that which is neither nor both, or the singularity bred from multiplicity or loneliness. I change my mind often, knowing there is infinitude in the space between the extremes. With this project, Moses Sumney explores a lot of things that have to do with identity. In the song Virile, Moses Sumney explores what the societal definition of masculinity kind of entails, with things like staking dominion over all that they see, being virile, and gatekeepers. This is the masculinity that is expected of men in society today. Moses Sumney even goes so far as to equate masculinity itself to a prison, and we're going to revisit this later. But in another song, the song called Boxes, he actually talks about the ways in which that so I'm talking about we to mean like societally, are like creating boxes and definitions for ourselves, and we're quite literally limiting ourselves, because once we are put in this box, whether we created it, that definition of ourselves or not, like whether we was created it ourselves or whether we was placed in it by society, we try to fit into that box when it doesn't actually help us. In Jack and Jill, we hear Moses and Jill Scott talking about someone, and as the song kind of goes on, there is like some changing of the pronouns for the things they were previously sort of describing as like feminine. So they start using sentences that they were using to describe the feminine. They started like interchanging like he is feminine type, and like switching up the pronouns. And it's like showing almost like with this song was showing like a breaking of the gender norms. On the track also, and he talks about insisting upon his multiplicity, which actually is further explored in the track that follows that one called Neither Nor, where he talks about not wanting to limit himself to anyone, to like just any one label. He wants to be able to exist in his multiplicity, even if that means ultimately he will be alone. And then later throughout the album, he also just explores relationships and how him wanting to not fit into any of these standard romance boxes and how that affects his relationships. He explores how him not fighting or like fighting into like trying to fight to like stay within these boxes that like society kind of puts puts people in may ultimately end up with him not finding a partner and him ultimately being alone. And so it was throughout this project that Moses Sumney does a really cool job of like exploring what it means to exist in an identity that you don't feel supports the standard roles that society expects you to take. But and I thought it was actually really interesting. So something that is really interesting actually. So the title I had thought of before writing, like one of the ideas that came to me for one of the topics for an episode was called Art and the In-Between. And so like before I even went to find art to kind of support the conversation I wanted to have today, that was the topic was art and the in-between. And it was pretty cool to like, when I found this project of his, that's exactly what he's exploring on this album, and he talks about what it means to exist in the in-between. And so in my case, I was using the term the in-between to kind of talk about identity and not quite fitting into the identity that society sort of expects of you. And those are definitely also themes that can be found in our next work of art. Our next work of art is a movie that came out earlier this year, actually. So the movie I Saw the TV Glow released across the U.S. It released like nationwide in the U.S. on like May 17th. It was at Sundance earlier in the year, but it released nationwide May 17th. It's a film written and directed by Jane Schoenbrunn, and it's available to rent online if you'd like to watch it. Because it is a very recent film, I'm going to do my best to give you like enough of a gist of the movie so that you can follow along with this episode. But I won't be able to like promise you will be like that this will be 100% spoiler free description, because like there's some of the things that I have to talk about because I want to talk about it in this episode. But I'm going to absolutely leave some things unsaid so that like there are still things you can discover when you first watch the movie. And so you can still have a good like just viewing experience. I want you to be able to watch the movie and still get something out of it. But with that being said, the movie I Saw the TV Glow follows Owen, a biracial boy in the 7th grade in 1996. We see him have an interest in watching this teen show called The Pink Opaque, but because it comes on after his bedtime, he doesn't get to watch it. We see him out with his mom, and he runs across a girl from his school named Maddie. Maddie's in the 9th grade, and she's actually reading a book about the Pink Opaque. He makes his interest in the show known to Maddie, and but he talks about how he's not allowed to watch it because it comes on after his bedtime. And they then kind of come up with a plan for him to watch the show that following weekend. And so he gets the chance to watch the show, and it quickly becomes one of his favorite shows. And now the show The Pink Opaque. So the show The Pink Opaque, just to give you a background about this show, The Pink Opaque follows two teen girls named Isabella and Tara. They have a psychic connection that is called The Pink Opaque. And they use it to fight their like monster of the week. It's like a different creature each week, of like on their respective sides of town. And so these monsters are sent by their big bad in this universe, who goes by the name of Mr. Melancholy, and he wants to trap them in the Midnight Realm because they are getting in the way of him trying to take over. And so like they don't. Mr. Melancholy doesn't want Tara and Isabella to kind of like prevent his plans from actually coming into fruition. So now we're going to jump back into the movie. So time passes, and we're now 2 years into the future, and Owen's mother is ill, and he still loves the show The Pink Opaque. He actually asked to watch the show because he's older now, and he feels like he should get to stay up older. He should get to stay up later. But the show still technically comes on after his bedtime. So, but like when his dad calls it a girl show, Owen is kind of discouraged from asking to watch it again, like to his parents. So after that happens, Maddie actually begins to like make tapes of the episodes for him. So like this is like the early like late 90s, and so like recording things on VHSs, and she's leaving them for him so that he can watch the show when he gets home and like watch it like before he goes to bed. And he gets to enjoy the show, and like he really enjoys the show. He watches all the tapes that she leaves him, and soon like that's not enough. Like he wants to watch the show again in real time. And so he finds Maddie and asks if he can come over to her place to like watch the Pink Opaque show again. She eventually like agrees, and he makes his way to Maddie's place that Saturday. After the episode, Maddie actually kind of confides in Owen that she intends to run away because she doesn't feel as though she fits in. And it's a feeling that she knows that Owen shares. And so she tells him to bring as many clothes as he can carry, so that they can run away together. And so this actually freaks him out. And he does not do it. Like he goes out of his way to like make sure he's not able to go. And so later, Maddie does end up going missing, and she is unable to be found. After that happens, we jump another 8 years into the future, and Owen is out of high school, and he's working at like a movie theater. He still feels like the isolation he kind of like did before, but he's moving on. Like he got to do what he got to do. Maddie actually shows back up again and gets him to agree to meet her at a bar outside of town. It is at this bar that Maddie tells Owen that she actually went into the show, The Pink Opaque, and that Owen needs to remember the finale of the show and meet up with her the next night, so that because she had a plan pretty much in place. So after that meeting, Owen goes home. He finds the tape to rewatch it so that he remembers. He remembers like exactly what she's kind of talking about, and it is in the finale episode that Mr. Melancholy, the big bad of the Pink Opaque, he actually finds and traps both Tara and Isabella, and he imprisons them both in what is referred to as the Midnight Realm. And so it is actually here that we see that Isabella is said to be imprisoned as Owen in the Midnight Realm. They are the same person. We get some flashbacks, and Owen is starting to remember everything, and so he actually does end up going to meet up with Maddie the next night. And she tells him about like what happened to her. So yeah, she tells him about what happened to her when she left after she disappeared. And then she tells him that like both her and him, like they're both, so like Maddie is Tara and Owen is Isabella. They are both in the Midnight Realm, and that she came back to save Isabella in the Pink Opaque, which is Owen. And so to save Isabella / Owen, they both have to be buried alive so that they can wake up in their real bodies back in the Pink Opaque. Owen again actually gets kind of freaked out and scared, and he refuses to do that with Maddie, and he goes home and ends up never seeing Maddie again after that. And so we fast forward some more years, and Owen is settled down, and it said he had children, and he's working at a family fun center, refilling the ball pit. We then fast forward another 20 years, and Owen is noticeably older, and he's physically weaker. Like you see and hear him like breathing heavily. And he is still working at the family fun center, refilling the ball pit. Now, while at work, he has a mental breakdown, and he's screaming for help, and that he's scared, and that he's not supposed to be there. But everyone who's like in the room with him, like he's in a party room, everyone that's in the room with him sort of just freezes. They freeze in place, and they do not even acknowledge that like he's freaking out. And so after that happened, he goes into the bathroom, and like he's able to confirm with himself that he is indeed a part of the Pink Opaque, and that sort of brings him a bit of solace. And so he returns to work after that, and the movie ends. Yeah, the movie just kind of ends right after that. So this movie was a really interesting way to tackle the idea of identity and what that looks like, and what like fitting into or not fitting into the role you are expected to take up in society looks like, and even what like that can do to you. Now, both of these works of art do a really good job of talking about identity and what defining oneself looks like. and like just in their own right. So something I found interesting is how both the Grey album by Moses Sumney and the movie I Saw the TV Glow, they depicted these roles that they are placed in as a prison. So in Grey, Moses Sumney talks about masculinity as a prison. So in the song Virile, he uses the lyrics, "Dear son, we pick our own prisons," alluding to the role he is supposed to play as a man in this society is equated to a prison in and of itself. Even talking about it in the song Boxes with the line, "I truly think that people who define you control you." And I Saw the TV Glow, Owen's literal life is the prison because he is the physical he's supposed to be the physical manifestation of Isabella in the Midnight Realm, and that being the prison. Him showing up as a role that he does not desire to be in is the prison. So Owen, like him in his physical form, is the prison for Isabella. And it's like Mr. Melancholy actually says that when he's trapping Isabella and says like you'll be in prison, and then she becomes Owen. And like throughout the movie, when you see Owen, he is like almost like a shell of himself, because unbeknownst to him, he is in prison in an identity that he doesn't want to be in. I found that to be incredibly fascinating. The stuckness of just the stuckness that somebody would feel when they're placed in a very specific role in society, and now you feel it's important that like you're expected to kind of fulfill that role. Like you feel stuck in trying to fulfill that role. Now, something I do think is important to mention that definitely needs to be considered when talking about the roles in which like people sort of have when it comes to identity. It's like just more should be considered into what goes into your role than just gender. So like it's not just like the role of like the feminine or the masculine in like those roles, but race also plays a very large part in the same role expectations often placed on people in society. So Moses Sumney said in Boxes, "And the most significant thing any person can do, but especially black women and men, is to think about who gave them their definitions and rewrite those definitions for themselves." And like in this, he's kind of speaking to the way that in the society we exist in today, not only does our gender play a role in the box that is the identity that we are expected to play, but so does race. Now, in I Saw the TV Glow, there isn't actually any discussion of race, and that is not to say it is because it is not important to Owen. But Owen, as someone who is both black and queer in what appears to be like a predominantly white suburb, absolutely has like different expectations for how he is to show up than other folks. And so this, however, is not actually a lens in which through Owen's experience is looked at. And so doesn't really get addressed in the movie, or it's just like it's not discussed in the film really. It's read like just something that kind of just goes straight through. Now, I will be linking a beautiful blog post that does discuss this very thing in relation to the movie. It's a blog post by Isaiah Frost Rivera, and I highly encourage you to check it out. It perfectly just sort of captures what could be said about the portrayal of race in that movie. Now, both Moses Sumney's album Grey and the movie I Saw the TV Glow also explore what it means to come to realize that you are in a box, in a role that society expects you to take on. So in Moses Sumney's song Conveyor, he talks about how both it is expected that someone simply falls in line of their expected role for the good of society, and then also how that doing that ultimately will leave you unfulfilled. Sort of simply like just being in that box, simply fulfilling that one specific role expected of you might lead you to being unfulfilled in other areas. And this is also explored in I Saw the TV Glow, where Maddie leaves town, and when she returns, she looks more like the version of herself that she wanted to be. She realized that by being in that town, she was trapped, and that if she stayed, she would have ultimately been unfulfilled. Like in the movie, she even tells Owen that if she stays, she will die. Whereas on the other hand, we saw Owen, who did ultimately stay, and he did feel that role that he was expected to feel, and he just sort of continued to struggle. Both of these works of art also do something else that I found to be incredibly interesting. So they both explore that decision after realizing the box that you are in. So they both went about this in different ways though. So with Moses Sumney, in his album Gray, he kind of came to terms with the box that is identity, and he chose not to stay in that box. And he chose to redefine who he is. So on his album, he explores the loneliness he experiences and feels he might experience like as a result of doing just that. In songs like Me in 20 Years, and even in his song Neither Nor, he explores what his life might look like should he continue on the path of identifying how he wishes to identify. And that is ultimately risking being alone, and ultimately also learning just to to just be okay with that, honestly. While Owen, on the other hand, and I Saw the TV Glow, after he finds out the truth, he opts to not confront and deviate from the identity placed upon him. So he chooses to remain who he like the role he was set in. And we see him get older, and he appears to be unhappy, and he appears to ultimately be unfulfilled. Sure, he was able to maintain the relationships he had by agreeing to remain that version of himself. And that the version of himself that even they knew, but he did what was expected of him to do in that role. He settled down, he had a family, he maintained a job to support that family, but he was still unhappy even in that role, and it ultimately that led to his mental breakdown. I personally do feel very often that people can come to the realization that they don't feel like they meet or fulfill the standards for the role they are expected to fulfill in society, and so and they want to change that, but out of fear of what that could mean to their already existing relationships and themselves with the people they come to become to be the closest with, they often do have to make a decision. And so it's it becomes, do they stay in a box anyway and maintain those relationships, but they always feel like something's missing, or just something's wrong with them, like Owen did? Or do they come to terms with the potential isolation if it means they get to be fully themselves, like Moses Sumney did? So maybe you have found yourself to be curious about your identity, the role you play in society. Maybe you want to explore something different and be something different, like Moses Sumney did, and like Moses Sumney explores in his album Gray. Or maybe you feel like you are too far gone and you need the reminder that you still have time, like in I Saw the TV Glow. So maybe the identity you desire to have, the role you wish to play, too, can be in art. In art, like everything else. Now, last but certainly not least, we have this week's Awe Moment. Now, for those new to listening, the Awe Moment segment is just the closing segment for the episode where I share a piece of art that made me think this week. So that could be a painting, that could be a poem, that could be a song, a tweet, anything really. I have probably what be considered a loose definition of art. But this week I have a quote from the book Something That May Shock and Discredit You. This is a book by Daniel Mallory Ortberg, and the quote goes, let me pull it up. The quote goes, "God blessed me by making me transsexual for the same reason." Well, it goes, as my friend Julian puts it, only half winkingly, "God blessed me by making me transsexual for the same reason God made wheat but not bread and fruit but not wine, so that humanity might share in the act of creation." And so now this isn't the first time I've ever heard of this quote. This week, it's just when working on this episode, this was a quote that kind of came to mind. And so you don't have to be trans per se to also be a human who gets to partake in the act of creation. As long as we're not harming anyone, like ourselves included, I do think it's really cool to create yourself in the way you want to be. Like, say you don't see or haven't found the group of friends or the community that you feel you can be yourself around. Cultivate that community. Create that chosen family that will make it so that it is easy for you to be around them. You don't feel like the relationships you want exist among the traditional sense and dynamics of what society constitutes a relationship. Again, like, do not harm anyone or be harmful, but also absolutely, like, find a partner or partners, who knows, maybe you're poly, and create that relationship. We too get to share in the act of that is creation. Our realities are not set in stone. We too get to be the artists of the lives we want to live. And that's all I have for you today. Like, comment, subscribe, and let me know what you think of this episode. And I want to thank you for listening. Thank you for being. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.